Sabahattin Ali Madonna, in a Fur Coat, Episode 1. One of the people I have come across by chance has probably had the biggest impact on me. Even though months have passed, I have never been able to get rid of this effect. Whenever I am alone with myself, Raif Effendi's pure face is a little distant from the world. However, it is a coincidence for a person. When they smile, their looks that want to smile come to life before my eyes. However, he was not an extraordinary man at all. In fact, he was one of those people who did not have any special characteristics, and we passed by without looking at hundreds of people around us every day. There was certainly no aspect of his life that would make people wonder about the parts of his life that we know and do not know. It is very sad when we see such people. We only ask ourselves why they live, what do they see in living, what logic, what wisdom orders them to walk around the earth and breathe. But while we think about this, we only look at the outside of those men. They also have a head inside, a mind that is condemned to work whether they want it or not. As a result of this, they have a mind of their own. We never think that they have an inner world, instead of judging that they do not live spiritually by looking at the manifestations of this world. If we were to wonder about this unknown world with the simplest human insight, it would be possible for us to see things we never expected and encounter riches we did not expect. But for some reason, people prefer to investigate what they predict they will find. It is certainly easier to find a hero who will go down to a well where it is known that a dragon lives at the bottom, than to find a person who will have the courage to go down to a well where it is not known what lies at the bottom. It is just a coincidence that I got to know Raif Effendi better after being expelled from a small mem training in a bank. Why I was expelled I still don't know. They told me it was just to save money, but they hired 20 men a week. I looked for a job in Ankara for a long time. My 5-10 kuruş money enabled me to get through the summer months without any trouble. But the approaching winter meant the end of sleeping on the couch in friends' rooms. He will renew his restaurant report card, which will expire in a week. I didn't even have enough money left. I took it knowing that there would be no results in many admissions exams, and when I didn't get any results, I got upset again for some reason. When I got rejected from the stores where I applied for a job as a clerk without my friend's knowledge, I chose wisely. I was wandering around until midnight. I couldn't forget the hopelessness of my situation, even at the drinking tables where I was occasionally invited by a few acquaintances. Strangely enough, as my distress increased and it became impossible for my needs to get me from one day to the next, my embarrassment, which I also learned, was increasing. When I came across some of my acquaintances on the street, to whom I had previously applied to find a job, and whom I had not been treated badly at all, I would keep my head down and pass quickly. I had changed even towards my friends from whom I had borrowed money. When they asked me how I was doing, I would reply with a rookie smile that it wasn't bad. I was finding occasional temporary jobs, and I would run away immediately. The more I needed people, the more I needed to escape from them. One day in the evening, on the lonely road between the station and Sergeyevi, walking slowly, breathing in the wonderful autumn of Ankara to my heart's content, I wanted to create an atmosphere in my soul. The sun reflecting from the windows of the public house and drowning the white marble building in blood-colored holes. The smoke rising above the acacia trees and pine saplings, and it is not clear whether it is dust or what. He was returning from a construction site and walking silently and a little hunched over in his tattered clothes. That is, the workers were walking on asphalt with car tire marks here and there. They all seemed happy with their existence, accepting everything as it was. So, there was nothing left for me to do. At this moment, I was walking faster than half a mile. The car passed, and when I turned my head and looked, I thought I recognized the face behind the glass. As a matter of fact, the car stopped after 5 to 10 steps, and the door opened. Hamdi, one of my school friends, was calling me with his head out. I snuggled in. He asked me where I was going. I was wandering around. Come on, let's go. Without waiting for my answer, he made room for me on the road. According to what he told me, the company he worked for was the company he worked for. He was coming from visiting some factories. Yes, he informed me via telegram, that they must have made preparations for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have dared to invite you. I laughed. I hadn't seen the uncle, whom I see often since I left the bank. He was an assistant manager in a company that was a broker for machinery, etc., and also dealt with forestry and lumber, and he was earning a pretty good salary. I knew that I didn't apply to him at the time. That was almost why I was afraid that he would think that I came to ask him for financial aid, not to ask him to find a job. He asked me if I was in the bank. I said no, I left. He was surprised. Where did I go? I reluctantly answered. He must not have regretted what he did, because he patted me on the shoulder with a friendly smile and said, "Don't mind, we'll talk and find a solution this evening." He looked pleased and confident. I mean, he was now at the point where he could even afford to help acquaintances. He lived in a small but cute house. He had a wife who was a bit ugly but friendly. They kissed me without any hesitation. Hamdi left me alone and went to take a bath. Since he didn't introduce me to his wife, I stood in the middle of the guest room, not knowing what to do. His wife was standing by the door and kept quiet about me without letting me know. I think she thought for a while, but then she didn't see the need for that and slowly crept out the whole time. I thought about the reason why Hamdi, who was not negligent and even paid great attention to such rules, and who owed part of his success in life to this attention, left me in the middle like this. I think one of the main habits of men who occupy important positions was the somewhat conscious absent-mindedness they showed towards their old and lagging behind friends. Until then, in your opinion, to be humble and fatherly enough to suddenly say "you" to the friends they address in a friendly manner, to interrupt the other person's speech and ask something meaningless at random, and to do this quite naturally, often with a smile full of compassion and mercy. All of these I have encountered so many times lately. It didn't even occur to me to be angry or offended at Hamdi. I just thought of getting up, leaving without telling anyone, and getting rid of this troublesome situation. But in the meantime, an old peasant woman wearing a white apron and a headscarf brought coffee with her patched black socks without making a sound. I sat down on one of the dark blue armchairs with silk flowers and looked around at the family and family on the walls. The photos of the artist appeared to belong to the lady. On a bookshelf, there were a few 25-cent novels and fashion magazines. A few albums lined up under a cigarette lamp seemed to have been badly beaten by the guests. Since I didn't know what to do, I took one of them. Before I even opened it, Hamdi appeared at the door, combing his wet hair with one hand and the other. He was waiting for the buttons of his open-collared white Frankish shirt. He asked, "So, how are you? Tell me how you are." I told him. He seemed happy to come across me. Maybe he was happy that he could show me HD degrees. Or maybe he was happy that he didn't own me, considering my situation. For some reason, when he saw that the people with whom we walked together for a while in life had a disaster and fell into some kind of trouble, we feel relieved as if we have avoided these troubles ourselves, and we want to show concern and mercy to those poor people, as if they brought the troubles that could happen to us, to themselves. Hamdi seemed to address me with the same feelings. He asked, "Do you write articles or something? Does poetry and story help from time to time?" At least I laughed again. "Stop such things, dear," he said, talking about his successes in practical life, and that useless things like literature could only be harmful after school, without ever thinking that he might reply to him, and that he might get into an argument. He spoke as if he were giving advice to a little child, and he had no hesitation in showing with his demeanor that he got this courage from his successes in life. I was looking at him admiringly with a smile I felt, and I was giving him more courage in this state. He was saying, "Come see me tomorrow morning. Let's see if we can think of something." He seemed to have completely forgotten that he was one of the prominent slackers in the school, or maybe he was talking recklessly because he was sure that I wouldn't rub it in his face here. He made a movement, as if he got up from his seat. I immediately found it right and extended my hand and asked him to allow me. "Why, dear, it's so early. But you know I had forgotten that you invited me to dinner, but suddenly I remembered. She seemed to have completely forgotten. I came to the door, took my hat and said, "Greetings to the lady." "It's okay, come by tomorrow. Don't worry, dear." When I went out, it was all messy. The darkened street lamps were on. I took a deep breath. Even though the air was mixed with dust, it felt exceptionally clean and refreshing to me. I walked slowly and went to Hamdi's company around noon the next day. However, when I left his house last night, I had no intention of doing so anyway. Salih had not made any promises. "Let's see if we can think of something. We will do something." I got used to listening to the owner of charity to whom I applied. For some reason, rather than a hope, I had a desire to see myself humbled. "You listened to my soul without making a sound last night, and you consented to it using the guardian blessing theory against you." I wanted to say, "Come on, let's take this to the end. You deserve it." The janitor first took me to a small room and made me wait. When I entered him, I felt the stupid smile on my face again, and I got even more angry with myself. Hamdi was busy with a lot of papers lying in front of him and a lot of officers coming in and out. He showed me a chair with his head and continued to mind his business. I went to the chair without daring to shake his hand. I felt astonished, as if the person in front of me was actually my supervisor, and even my parent, and I felt that I really deserved this treatment for my degraded self. I was insulted. What a huge problem had arisen between me and my schoolmate, who picked me up on the road last night, in just over 12 hours. The person who regulates the relations between people. How ridiculous the superiors were, how empty they were from the outside, and especially how little they had to do with real humanity. Neither Hamdi nor I had changed since last night. Anyway, we followed suit, despite this, about me. Some of the things we learned about him were some small and detailed things. It took us in different directions. The strange thing about it is that we both accepted this change as it was, and of course we found it. My anger was not at Hamdi, not at myself, but at just being here. At a moment when the room was getting deserted, my friend raised his head and said, "I found a job for you." Then he looked at my face, looking into his brave and meaningful eyes. He added, "I have invented a job. It is not a tiring thing. You will follow our work in some banks, especially in our own bank. It is almost like a liaison officer between the company and the banks. In your spare time, you sit inside and mind your own business. Write as many poems as you want." I talked to the manager. "We will appoint you, but for now there is not much for you. We won't be able to give it 40-50 lira in the future. Of course it will increase. Let's see." Successes extended his hand without getting up from his seat. I approached him and thanked him. There was a sincere satisfaction on his face for what he did to me. I thought that he was not a bad person at all. He was just doing what was required of his position, and that maybe this was really necessary. But when I went out, I was in the corridor. I paused for a while and hesitated whether to go to the room he described to me or to leave this place and run away. Then, slowly, with my head down, I walked a few steps and asked the first janitor I met about translator Raif Effendi's room. The man pointed to an unusual door with his hand and passed by. I stopped again. Why couldn't I just leave? Was it because I couldn't sacrifice my lira salary, or was I afraid of committing a shameful act against Hamdi? No. Unemployment that had been going on for months. Not knowing where to go or where to look for a job when I got out of here. And the lack of courage that I was completely in the grip of. That's what kept me in that dim corridor and the other janitor who was going to pass by. These were the things that made me wait. Finally, I searched a random door and saw Raif Effendi inside. I didn't know him before. However, I immediately felt that this man I saw bent over his desk could not be anyone else. Then I thought about where this opinion came from. Hamdi, I had my German translator Raif Effendi put a table for you in his room. He is silent. He quietly said, "He is a godly man. He will not harm anyone." Then, at a time when everyone was being called, "Mr. Isn't it?" I asked. The person in front of me drove me for a while. Then, in a light and almost cowardly voice, "Yes, it's me. I think you are too." As is the custom, I wanted to secretly examine my friend and make false conclusions about him with furtive glances. But I saw that he did not feel this desire at all, and that he bent his head to the task in front of him and was busy as if I was not in the room. I continued like this until noon. I now opened my eyes recklessly. I stared at the person in front of me. His short-cut hair was starting to open at the top. He was getting small wrinkles from under his ears to his neck. He was running his hands with long and thin fingers through the papers in front of him, and was translating without any trouble. From time to time he would raise his eyes as if he was thinking of a word he couldn't find, and when our eyes met, there would be a smile-like movement on his face. Even though he looked quite old when viewed from above, he had an astonishingly naive and childish expression, especially when he was laughing like this. His blonde mustache, clipped from the bottom, strengthened this expression. On the way to dinner, he noticed that he had moved from his place, opened one of the drawers of the table, and placed a piece of bread wrapped in paper and a small piece of bread in front of him. I saw him take out a lunchbox. I said bon appetit and left the room. Even though we sat across from each other in the same room for days, we hardly talked about anything. He met many of the officers in other services. We even went out together in the evening and started playing backgammon in a cafe. As I learned from them, Raif Effendi was one of the oldest officers in the institution. Before this company was founded, he was the translator of the bank to which we are affiliated now. No one remembered when he came there. It was said that he had a very large family and could barely make ends meet with the salary he earned. Meanwhile, when I asked him why the company, which was spending a lot of money on this and that despite being senior, did not increase his salary, the young officers laughed and said that he was a slothful person. They even suspected him of knowing a decent person. However, I learned later that I knew German very well and that his translations were very accurate and beautiful. I could easily write a letter about the knots and roots coming from Yugoslavia's Susak port, or about the processing style and spare parts of traversing machines. He was translating the specifications and contracts he had translated from Turkish into German. The company manager was sending them to their places without hesitation. When he was free, I saw him reading a book absently, without opening the table and taking it out. One day, I asked him what he was, Mr. Raif, as if I had caught him doing something wrong. He said novel and immediately closed the drawer. However, no one in the company thought that he would know a foreign language. Maybe they had the right to do so, because his halva attitude did not look like a person who knew any language. A foreign word came out of his mouth while he was talking. It was never heard of him talking about knowing a foreign language. He had a foreign language in his hand and in his pocket. His newspapers and magazines were not seen. In short, he was not like those who shouted with all their being that we know French. The fact that he did not want his salary to be increased based on his knowledge, and that he did not look for other and well-paid jobs, strengthened this opinion about him. He came on time in the mornings, had lunch in his room, and went home immediately after doing his small shopping in the evenings. Even though I offered him several times, he did not agree to come to the coffee house. He said, "They will wait at home." I thought, Masoud is a family man. Whenever he found a small typewriting error in the translations of the book, he would immediately call the poor man and sometimes come to our room and scold him. My friend, who was always cautious about other officers and was afraid of receiving a bad response from these young people, each of whom depended on favors of some kind, harassed Raif Effendi so much, knowing that he would never dare to respond to him. It was very easy to understand why he turned red and shouted to the whole building for a delayed translation for a few hours. There is nothing that makes people as sweetly intoxicated as trying out their power and authority over one of their own kind, especially the opportunity to do this with some delicate calculations. Therefore, Raif Effendi can only show himself against certain people from time to time. He would get sick and could not come to the hospital. These were mostly insignificant colds, but a pleurisy that he said he had years ago made him very cautious. Even if a small cold caught him, he immediately confined himself to his home. When he went out, he wore layers of woolen undershirts. When he was in the apartment, he never opened the windows. He wore scarves around his neck and ears in the evenings. He did not leave without lifting the collar of his slightly worn-out axe, and when he was sick, he did not neglect his work. The laws to be translated were sent to his home in a cubicle and were taken away after a few hours. However, there is something in the way the director in our praise treated Raif Effendi that makes you want to say, look, he does not open you despite your whiny and sick state. They didn't hesitate to hit him in the face every once in a while after being away for a few days. They would greet him with good wishes and saying, I hope it's over now. However, I was starting to get bored of Raif Effendi. I didn't sit there for long at the company. I was accepting banks and orders with a briefcase in my hand. From time to time, he would go around our government offices and sit at my desk to prepare this document and explain it to the manager or assistant manager. However, I came to the conclusion that this man sitting at the table opposite me, so motionless as to make me doubt whether he was alive, translating, reading the German novel in his drawer, was truly a meaningless and boring creature. He thinks that a person with something in his soul cannot resist the desire to express them. I guessed that such a quiet and indifferent person had a life not much different from that of his plants. He comes here like a machine, does his work, reads some books with a caution I cannot understand, and does his shopping in the evenings. He was probably returning home. They look just like each other. This is the only change in many days and even years. He says that the times of illness are the only change. He has always been living like this. He has never seen him get excited in any way. He always responds to the most groundless and unfair accusations of his superiors with the same calm and expressionless look. While handing it to the typewriter and taking it away, he always asked with the same meaningless smile. He was thanking him. One day, Hamdi came to our room and said in a very harsh voice, "How long will we wait? I have work to do in a hurry. I will go." He shouted, "You did not bring the translation of the letter from the Hungarian company." He shouted, "I finished it correctly, as quickly as possible from his other old move. Sir, the ladies could not write in any way. They were given other work. Didn't I tell you that this was all in a hurry?" "Yes, sir," I told them. Hamdi shouted even louder, "Instead of answering me, refer me to you." Do the job he was told, and left by knocking on the door. Raif Effendi came out after him and went to beg for the typewriters again. I thought about Hamdi, who did not even see the need to throw a small evil eye at me during this whole meaningless scene. Meanwhile, he came in again, substituted a German translation, bowed his head, and made a striking impression on his face: astonishment. In fact, I had that unshakable guilt that led to anger. He took a pencil in his hand and started scribbling on the paper. He was not writing, he was drawing some computer. But this action was not an angry man unconsciously busy with anything. In fact, I noticed that a confident smile appeared on the corner of his lips, just below his blonde mustache. He was slowly moving on the paper, and he was stopping every now and then, narrowing his eyes and looking in front of him. I could tell from that faint smile on his face that he was happy with what he saw. Finally, he put the pen down next to him and watched the paper he was scribbling on for a long time. I was looking at him without taking my eyes off. This time, he had a brand new face on his face. I was surprised when I saw that an expression appeared. It was as if he was pitying someone. I couldn't sit still because of curiosity. As I was about to get up, he straightened up and went back to the office of the Taktiros. I immediately jumped up. I suddenly reached the opposite table and took the paper on which Raif Effendi had drawn something. When I took a look at it, I was astonished. I saw Hamdi on the palm of paper, Kader, with all his identity on 5 simple but extraordinarily masterful lines. I don't think others will find the same resemblance. In fact, when examined one by one, maybe no part of it was similar. But for a person who saw how he had just reached the center of the room, screaming, there was no mistake. There was no way. This mouth that stood open independently with animalistic rage and an indescribable vulgarity, even though it wanted to pierce the place it was looking at. These eyes in lines that looked like they were drowned in impotence. These eyes with wings exaggerated. This nose that expanded to the cheeks and thus gave the noodle a more wild expression. Yes, these are a few minutes. Before, standing there was the picture of Hamdi, or rather, his soul. But that was not the main reason for my amazement. Since I joined the company for months, I have been making many contradictory judgments about him. Sometimes Mansour was trying to see him, and many times I confessed that his real personality and the personality given to him by his current position were intertwined. I was mixing them up and then trying to separate them, and I was getting into a complete dead end. Hamdi, whom Effendi had revealed with a few lines, was a person whom I had wanted to see for a long time but could not see. Despite all the primitive and wild expression of his face, he had a pitiful side. The participation of cruelty and wretchedness has never been seen so clearly anywhere else. It was as if I had actually met my friend of 10 years for the first time today. At the same time, this picture had suddenly explained Raif Effendi to me. Now I understood his unshakable calmness and his strange shyness in his relations with people. Is it possible for him to be angry with anyone? What can he do other than standing like a stone against someone who struggles with all his pettiness in front of such a man? All our sorrows, our frustrations, our anger, are the incomprehensible and unexpected aspects of the events we encounter. Is it possible to shake a person who is ready for anything and knows what can come from anyone? Raif Effendi, I am... It took on a curious nature again in my mind, despite the light that had just appeared about him. I sensed that there were many contradictions. The accuracy in the lines of the picture I was holding in my hand showed that it was not the work of an enthusiast. The person who made this must have been dealing with painting for many years. Here, not only is there an eye that actually sees what it is looking at, but it also shows what it sees in all its subtleties. It was a skill that knows how to detect. The door opened. I wanted to leave what I had in my hand on the table quickly, but I was late. I said apologetically to Raif Effendi, who approached me with the translation of the letter from the Hungarian company, that it was a very beautiful picture. I thought he would be surprised and afraid that I would give away his secret. This is not always the case. He took the paper from me with his strange and absent-minded smile and said, "I was busy with drawing for a while years ago. You see, I scribble something by hand from time to time. Meaningless things are boredom. That's it." He crumpled the picture in his palm and threw the bold type on the typewriter. I guess there are mistakes because ladies write in a hurry, but if I try to read it, Hamdi, I will make Bey even more angry. He has the right, let me take him and give him back. He went out again, I followed him with my eyes. He has the right, he has the right. It was said, he has the right too. End of the first episode.